Do you notice that in the corner? The edge there has a large pool of gold. That's awesome. God, I think we might discover some really nice ones if we see this right away. Imagine spending $15 million to drill a hole in the ground and hope for something other than ice and dirt. That's a surefire way to go bankrupt for most people. It just happened to be another Tuesday for Parker Schnabel. However, things were different this time. Not only did his high-stakes wager in a long-forgotten Alaskan shaft pay out, it burst to a dazzling jackpot of $78 million. The legends of the North have a lot of fans. However, this is not a legend. It is the true, suspenseful story of how a young person in his 20s outwitted 100 prospectors. An enormous error worth millions of dollars. Parker Schnabel, a native of Alaska, brought just $140,000 to the Yukon 8 years ago. Even though he has already extracted around $60 million worth of gold, he is running out of ground. While many people are obsessed with the prospect of being wealthy, few are aware of the overwhelming danger that precedes the reward. This season was the ultimate test for Parker Schnabel. He went all in, investing $15 million of his personal funds in the enormous 7,500-acre Yukon property known as Dominion Creek. This wasn't only a statement. It was an empire, a territory so large that it could engulf whole mining communities. Music. It's critical that we complete this extension as quickly as possible. The objective was, to put it mildly, bold. In one season, extract 5,000 ounces of gold from the earth. That's more gold than some mines generate in a decade. To put that into context, Dominion Creek was a tale, you see, but a bad one. While modern miners saw nothing but cold muck and heartbreak, the locals told stories of wealth. If there was gold at all, it was buried 40 feet deep in permafrost. It's more than simply frozen ground here. We're discussing a layer of rock, gravel, and dirt that has a concrete-like consistency and has been frozen solid for thousands of years. Parker's team had to fight the earth itself in order to get to pay dirt, tearing through the ice one painful inch at a time with enormous dozers equipped with ripper attachments. The Schnabel crew is fighting permafrost in the Payer, following one of the most severe winters ever. Every day, thousands of dollars were spent on petrol alone, which was extremely expensive. The enterprise began with a series of disastrous failures. Regardless of whether they discovered gold, it was a total fiasco, to put it frankly. Almost instantly, machines, which are essential to any mine, started to malfunction. Like a twig, a huge excavator bucket, a strong steel object made to move mountains, split in two. What on earth is this? Do you mean me? It lifts the hole off the blade. We don't need another machine to go down like this. Massive machinery came to a grinding stop when hydraulic lines transporting fluid under extreme pressure burst, spouting essential fluid. Every malfunction wasn't only a holdup. There was a financial loss. Tens of thousands of dollars could be spent on repairs and lost productivity for only one day of downtime. Nothing came of the original plan to mine old tailings for some fast cash flow. Pan after pan yielded nothing. They're all silent witnesses to their failed endeavor. The morale of the crew fell. These are hardy, experienced miners, but the constant strain, the freezing temperatures, and total dearth of gold were wearing them down. They were spending a pile of money every day and had nothing at all to show for it. Parker, who was just out of his 20s, was burdened with the consequences of this $15 million risk. There was a noticeable tension. This dream was quickly becoming a nightmare. Big Red, his dependable wash plant that had served him well for years, was turning out to be too tiny and ineffective for the scope of this new claim. Under the strain, it also started to fail. Parker was on the verge of complete collapse and had to make yet another dreadful choice. He invested an additional $1 million to construct a brand new, specialized wash plant, which he called Roxanne. It was a last-ditch attempt to change the course. Many people failed to notice this new plant's enormous size. The capacity of Roxanne was intended to handle hundreds of tons of pay each hour. The season could be made or broken by this accomplishment. A ray of optimism among the shadows. The first run was a success. However, the triumph was fleeting. Soon after, the entire multi-million-dollar machine came to a complete halt due to a simple loose cable. A huge water hose then burst, flooding the site and adding another expensive delay. The ground itself appeared to be cursed and actively resisted them. Parker was now dealing with more than simply failure. He was looking into the depths of a bankruptcy that would terminate his career. Then, however, something changed. In the middle of the confusion and hopelessness, one shocking discovery was found. It was unique, even though it wasn't large. Weighing slightly more than 4/10 of an ounce, a crew member discovered a unique dendritic gold nugget, a sunning formation like a tree branch. This piece was worth much more than its weight in gold to a collector. They were in the proper area, and it was a sign, a glimmer of optimism. It signified that special fine gold was out there, just waiting to be discovered someplace in that cold hell. The secret that opened everything was that little bit. However, this small discovery paled in comparison to the golden boulder that was hidden behind it. The fact that gold mining is a science of shadows and whispers is something that no one tells you. Miners look for hints that point to a source, little dots of color amid a sea of brown. There was whisper in that dendritic nugget. Parker's team decided to focus more on a particular, unassuming part of the claim. As a result, they discovered a solid object during the excavation of this new location that shouldn't have been there. The excavator found it difficult to lift the enormous boulder. A streak of bright yellow emerged as the machine scraped against its surface. This was more than just a rock that contained gold. A thick, unreal vein of pure gold appeared to run through the boulder itself. A huge lump of solid gold, weighing an astounding 100 ounces, burst free as they worked carefully to retrieve it. Suddenly, they were in possession of $200,000 worth of gold. Desperation gave way to joy on the claim. At last, they were on a pay run. You see, though, this is the end of the story that the world watched on TV. The $78 million mystery, the true story, then starts. The boulder itself was not the focus of the cameras. That enormous rock was a natural anomaly, a geological oddity. It was not indigenous to the region. It was a placer boulder, as geologists refer to them, a piece of an old gold-rich vein that was dumped in this valley after being sliced off a mountain by a glacier millions of years ago. That rock served as a marker for a much bigger source that was concealed close by. Parker developed an obsession. He was aware that discovering 100 chunks was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. However, figuring out where that chunk came from would be a legacy. He formed a small, covert team to look into the origins of the boulder. After removing his best personnel from the main operation, they employed magnetic surveys and ground-penetrating radar, which are typically saved for extensive industrial exploration rather than a rough Klondike claim. They were searching for a feeder vein, the fabled source from whence all of the creek's loose placer gold came. As they drilled test shafts, they found nothing for weeks. The primary business was now generating consistent revenue, sufficient to pay expenses and begin making a profit. However, Parker was immediately reinvesting that profit in his covert investigation. Then they discovered it. Far below the surface of their present mine, the radar detected a huge metallic trace. It was not a rock. There was a line, hundreds of feet of transparent deposit. The vein had been located. Parker needed to decide, either keep up his lucrative surface mining or take another chance to pursue this ghost. The ghost was his choice. They started the costly and risky process of sinking a deep exploration shaft. They were no longer gravel-scooping placer miners. They were becoming into hard rock miners, searching well below the surface of the ground for a vein. This was the shaft in Alaska that would make all the difference. They braved unthinkable risks in order to get to this vein. Hard rock wager. One of the riskiest tasks in the world is drilling a shaft into permafrost. Because of the unstable ground and the tremendous pressure, tunnel collapses might happen suddenly. The risks increased with each step they took deeper. It was extremely expensive, both in terms of gasoline and equipment, as well as labor. They were drilling and blasting their way toward the radar signal while working in cramped conditions around the clock. The problem with hard rock mining is that it's a whole other animal. The vein's potential wealth is not assured. After a few feet, it can pinch out into nothing or be fool's gold. Many failed to notice that Parker was acting entirely outside of his area of competence. He was a placer miner and an expert in water dynamics and earth movement. This world was different. He had to appoint experts, seasoned hard rock musicians who viewed his ambitious idea with suspicion. The financial burden was enormous. This new covert operation was using up the income from the primary site. Parker would lose what he had just won and more if the vein turned out to be a bust. He would spend the rest of his life in debt. The figures are astounding. Establishing a modern deep earth mining operation might cost up to $1 billion. Parker used adapted equipment and pushed his staff to the limit in an attempt to complete the task on a shoestring budget. There were scary times. A piece of equipment was trapped for days at one point when a part of the shaft's wall fell away. On another occasion, they encountered a pocket of subterranean water that threatened to halt their progress by flooding the shaft's bottom. The money cost was equal to the emotional cost. The crew became divided as a result of the project's secrecy. The majority of the miners just knew that the profits were vanishing into an enigmatic hole in the ground. They had no idea what Parker was doing. Parker's wager, however, was supported by more than simply a radar signal. He always heard tales of the Mother Lode, a legendary source vein that was supposed to have supported the Klondike Gold Rush, from his grandfather, the renowned John Schnabel. He had given Parker his old maps and journals, and John thought it was real. There was a little enigmatic message in a corner of the Dominion Creek claim on one of those maps. This is where the mountain's heart bleeds. The radar signal and the location were nearly identical. Gold was the only thing Parker was after. He was trying to follow in his grandfather's footsteps. They finally made it after weeks of arduous, risky labor. It was unlike anything anyone had ever seen, and they struck the right note. It was more than a faint golden quartz line. Glistening in the headlamp beams was a deep, rich ribbon of nearly pure gold. The first core samples were astounding, indicating an almost unfathomable concentration of gold. They were aware that they had discovered something momentous, but they were unaware of its actual magnitude. Parker was on the verge of becoming a legend because to this revelation. However, how is it possible to extract that much gold from the earth? Finding the vein was only the first step. The extraction of the gold presented the next obstacle. They were unable to just dig it out. Tons of ore needed to be carefully drilled, blasted, and transported to the surface. It was a laborious, long procedure. They were receiving dozens of ounces of gold for each ton of ore they brought up. It was difficult to understand the sheer amount. They were employing a tiny wash plant for the covert operation, but it was overloaded. In actuality, gold was accumulating and awaiting processing. How did they arrive at $78 million then? There were several nuggets. That one vein was the source of an unimaginable, constant stream of gold. Over the next few months, Parker's small team retrieved more than 14,000 pounds of gold from that shaft while operating in complete secrecy. Take a moment to process that. 14,000 pounds. Given the erratic gold price at the time, the overall worth was an incredible $78 million. The haul was so enormous that it seemed unbelievable. A character out of a movie, not a distant Yukon mining property. Many viewers of the show ponder whether this actually occurred and why it wasn't the primary plot point. The problem is that a major finding like this alters everything. A modern-day gold rush to the Yukon would result from the announcement of a discovery of this size on television, sparking turmoil and security concerns. Parker would become a huge target as a result. Therefore, it was decided to conceal the full scope of the discovery. The 100 nugget, a great discovery in and of itself, but only a crumb in comparison to the whole bread, was the subject of the story that aired. Thus, there is still a $78 million question. How much gold remains hidden beneath the ice? Do the most valuable items remain to be discovered? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. Remember to like and subscribe for more untold tales from the most remote corners of the globe.